What is the state of terrorism across the globe? To answer that question, the 2025 Global Terrorism Report has been released this week. Well, the Global Terrorism Index is a comprehensive study analyzing the impact of terrorism across 99.7% of the world's population. Well, that report is produced by the Institute for Economics and Peace. Given the significant resources committed to counterterrorism by the Nigerian government, it is important to analyze and help inform a positive, practical debate about the future of counterterrorism and, of course, the required public responses. So, Babajide Ogunsanwo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channels Television's data analyst, is right here with me to share more intelligence about the 2025 Global Terrorism Index. Thank you very much, Babajide, for joining us on the news at 10.
Good evening, Anna.
Now, the Global Index scorecard is already out, as we know. What does this report say about progress in Nigeria, or what Nigeria is doing in terms of making progress, and what the global concern is about terrorism, actually?
So in this report, with reference to Nigeria, there's some good news and there's some bad news.
As always.
Now, the bad news is Nigeria still is classified and still ranked among the top 10 most terrorized countries in the world. That's the bad news. However, there's some real good news. And the good news is, within this report, they make it clear that in 2015, Nigeria was ranked the second most terrorized country in the world. That was in 2015, just one step behind Iraq. Now they say we've significantly improved, especially within the last 1 year. So we've moved from being ranked number 2 in terrorism in the world in 2015 to now number 6. Yes, so if we look at it from our position in 2015, and that is good news. However, if we look at it from the evidence that we are still within that top 10 that we need to get out from, that is the bad news. But one way to summarize this report, Anne, is after studying it, I've put together what I'll classify as the top 10 facts of the latest report from the Global Terrorism Index that was reported this week. And if you take a look at this top 10 facts, it allows us to clearly understand the state of terrorism in Nigeria. And what are these top 10 facts? The number 1 fact is the Islamic State and its affiliates remain the world's deadliest terrorist group in 2024, last year, and they are active in 22 countries. That's fact 1 of the top 10 facts. If we look at fact 2 from the Global Terrorism Index and the Institute of Economics and Peace, they've made it clear that there are more conflicts in the world than at any time since the end of World War II in 1945. Currently, the Global Terrorism Index is saying that there are 69 global conflicts in the world today, and the world has never seen as many conflicts as it is currently seeing since the end of the Second World War. Within this report, it's also clear that the Pakistani Taliban is the fastest growing terrorist organization in the world. And so we have to keep our eyes on exactly what is going on in Pakistan, and potentially will this spread to Africa. Now, the challenge is the Sahel region is still the most affected region globally. And this is very important because currently the Sahel region accounts for 51% of all global deaths from terrorism. Let's not forget that in 2007, the Sahel region accounted for only 1%. So the Sahel region in Africa has moved from accounting for 1% of total terrorism deaths in 2007 to now 51%. The GTI also makes it clear that terrorism in the Sahel is influenced by these factors: poor governance, pastoral conflicts, ecological degradation, clearly major economic issues, jihadist, and transnational interests, which will go clearly to look at what are the sentiments about transnational interest later tonight. Another fact from this GTI says that radicalization is more rapid than ever. So they go back to 2002 when it took about 16 months for people to be radicalized. In 2015, it took about 10 months, but today people are getting radicalized in a matter of weeks. So there are clear concerns on the speed of radicalization. 7th fact out of this top 10, the JNIM, that's the Jamaat Nusrat group, is the dominant terrorism group in the Sahel. However, and the good news is that ISWA is on the decline, but the JNIM is on the rise. Fact 8, 93% of all terrorism deaths in the West are not caused by groups, they are caused by lone actors. So while we see a lot of groups causing terrorism In Africa and the Sahel, most of the deaths that are due to terrorism in the West are usually by lone actors. And lone actors actually are 3 times more likely to be successful than if it were a terrorism organized by a group. The final is perhaps the most sensitive. That's the point 10. And they take us back within this report to remember that in the 1970s, 49% of conflicts then resulted in a victory for the country. 49% of conflicts resulted in a victory. We're in a situation where now, in the 2010s, only 9% of conflicts are resulting in victories. In simple terms, what this point makes is that it's becoming harder for countries and states to find solutions to conflicts. Looking at what I talked about, Islamic State being the deadliest terrorist group, that's what the chart in front of us speaks to, which what the report is clearly saying is that we see that Islamic State is still the most dominant terrorist group. However, that is on the decline, and we see the fast rise of the JNIM, especially in the Sahel. So yes, as of 2015, there were very little mentions of the JNIM, but based on these trends, in the next 2 years, if these trends continue, what the report is saying is that the name that will be in the media space will more likely be JNIM than ISIS or ISWAP, so that's pretty much the summary of this report, looking at the 10 facts and looking at the major rise of this new terrorist organization that was pretty much small in 2015 but has significantly grown.
So we've talked about the problem. Now let's talk about the solution. We've mentioned the Sahel region, which is ranked the most affected by terrorism. Is there any information about the strategy, how we can turn things around?
So the strategy is for the Sahel region to collaborate better, especially when we talk about the Sahel, we're talking about Burkina Faso, the core Sahel, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, Mauritania, Chad. That's the core Sahel before we talk about the other non-core Sahel of Senegal, parts of northern Nigeria, parts of Sudan, parts of Algeria. So the expectation is for this to really improve. All countries, the core Sahel especially, and the non-core Sahel have to be able to find a way to collaborate together. How will that happen? It's looking more complicated, especially if you take a look at the sentiment. And if you take a look at the sentiment from this core Sahel regions, how do they perceive Russia and the US? Those are the challenges. In Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad, and Niger, based on the report from the Global Terrorism Index, majority of the citizens perceive Russia more as a friend compared to the US. So that is the challenge. How will all these core nations be able to work with non-core nations? And at the end of the day, let's focus on why there's progress and why people are optimism, especially from this report about the state of Nigeria. And within this report, the report says that we should take a look at where we were in 2014 in Nigeria, when terrorist attacks in Nigeria then, as reported by the Global Terrorism Index, 713 attacks. This report now tells us that Nigeria is at its lowest when it comes to terror incidents. In simple terms, this is the best report Nigeria is having in this decade. The report says that terrorist attacks in Nigeria for the year 2024 was down to 99. That's less than 100 compared to what it was in 713 attacks in 2014, a decade earlier. So what we've seen is, looking at the wave and the decline of terrorism attacks, especially since 2020, we see that there's been a significant decline. However, 2024 has been the best year for Nigeria in over this decade. And in the final analysis, let's also end with some of the thoughts on the military leadership on this global terrorism report, because it allows us to clearly now put our thoughts together on, you've seen where we came from 2014, and the report is clearly stating that our progress doesn't mean that we should start celebrating. Yesterday's progress is now history. Our focus is on today. And those are the words of the Chief of Defense Staff General Christopher Gwabi Musa, talking about sharing the thoughts of the military leadership on the 2015 Global Terrorism Report. Clearly, there's progress, but he's saying that this isn't the time to celebrate and that the focus is now on today. I think that's the way to go. Now we'll be waiting for what will the next report, the Global Terrorism Report for 2026, give us. And that report of 2026 will be dependent on the performance of 2025.
All right, great. We end with those words of determination from the CDS. But thank you very much. Babajide Ogunsanwo, founder of Leadership by Data and Channel Television's.
The pleasure is always mine.
Exciting analysis always on the news at 10. Thank you.